think we've had a quite a little journey here so far, and I think we'll be
Definitely.
touching upon some tracing of that and a little feeling for what's coming. Our dear Sophia, the one in the human flesh, is not feeling well and is unable to join us. We miss you. So I have a question, and that is, Angus, what do you think the anthroposophical significance of this Ukraine Russian conflict is really? What's underlying it as a symptom of our time?
You want me to basically just like go on talking without pausing for an hour? I guess. No, I want this to be a conversation. I'm going to do. I'm going to bring up one person's name, and then I'm going to bring up another person's name, and we'll see which ones you like the sound of more. So I do think the Ukraine question, or I can select certain things from a couple of anthroposophical perspectives why there's something deeply spiritual going on here, and there are several people in anthroposophical circles who've written about this. I think Terry Boardman is a very interesting writer on that front. He goes into quite some considerable detail. I mentioned Adriana Kualis, if I pronounce her name correctly. She's an Australian, has written Rosicrucian series books. I've never read any of them, but she's a very interesting person, and she's put stuff on Facebook.
But can you spell her name?
Yeah, Adriana, Adriana, and then Koualis, and so she's produced a lot of what I would call high quality stuff. I've been learning Italian for a few years, and I found a channel called Libero Pensare, or something like that. It's really good. If you're Jonathan, I know you're in Italy. I don't know whether you read much Italian, but there's a guy called Piero Camineresi, writes some really good stuff. Anyway, one day he had translated a story that Adriana had done, or Adriana, I'm not sure how she spells her name or says her name, but she was talking about she did a karmic piece of research on Bohemian Rhapsody and Freddie Mercury, and it was so impressive what she did that because I realized it being translated from English, I tracked down the original author. He probably said the source actually in there. So I actually finally managed to find her on somewhere, and connected with her on Facebook, basically saying, I've read some of your stuff outside, and please let me be part of your group. So she's a really interesting lady. So you've got these people, for example, writing about it, and if I had prepared what I was going to say today, I could have probably looked at recent issues of is it called The Present? There's Perseus Verlag, a Perseus
Present Age, yeah.
A Present Age, that's right. And then there's the German version, Der Europäer, I think it's called. So they often have interesting articles in those papers which sometimes touch on this topic. But none of that's got anything to do with what I've uncovered this week. So with digging into Sophia, I've been looking particularly at a guy called Vladimir Soloviev, who Steiner talks about, and I've looked a tiny little bit into Alexander Bloch and Andrei Belli, who a long time ago I read his book St. Petersburg. But I was reading somebody's summary of Soloviev's idea of what this Sophia being is, because he met her on 3 occasions, according to his. There's a book or a short book or something like that called 3 Meetings. I haven't dug into that yet, but he met her once in the British Museum, once somewhere in Amsterdam, and then finally, it's like the biggest revelation. He rushed off to Egypt and had what seems to be like a similar experience to Boetius that we talked about in the first chat. Anyway, long way of introduction. What's this got to do with what's happening in Central Europe at the moment? This Soloviev guy, he paints a picture, a really interesting picture and it corresponds so well with anthroposophical ideas as well, which I find really interesting. But he talks in terms of the anti-Christ-like nature of Western Europe, in the sense that it's selfish in that sense. It's like completely materialistic, denying the value of Christ. The picture he's presenting is that this is what Russia needs to experience, a taste of this, before it sort of like wakes itself up. So one of the pictures he creates is so like the selfish impulses of the West. They have to cause their mayhem. They have to infect Russian society, so that the Russian soul, let's call it the Russian soul, because I don't want to get involved in current politics and all the confusion that can happen there. But the Russian soul needs to experience that selfishness. I mean, the I that we're talking about when we talk about Fichte and Leibniz and these people, they are still very, in Soloviev's words. So he wrote this 100 years ago. So the Russian folk is still asleep, and it needs this wake up impulse from the West. But when it does wake up, what it will do, what we will see is the Western world will succumb to this antichrist, materialistic worldview, and will fall into complete decadence. Whereas the Russian soul will be capable of taking that the strengthened self and then Christianizing it, filling it full of the Christ impulse. And whether or not that's happening now is a completely different matter. But I think it's a very interesting perspective that he brings out here, that, I mean, you won't find this portrayed in the media, but that this fall that's happening, that we're seeing, this fall of civilization that's accelerating in Europe. I mean, it's quite astounding what we have seen in the last couple of years, to the extent to which what used to be considered democratic countries are becoming increasingly dictatorial in their statutes. Well, yeah. I mean, okay. It's another image. You have to be a little bit careful about these images, but the Van Stauffenberg, it's they say that, I think it was 43 that he tried to blow up Hitler. Was it? Does anybody know correctly? Was it 42 or 43?
It would have been 43 out of those two. I can't quite remember.
I think somebody can check that out later. But a thought that I've heard expressed is that no, Hitler couldn't be killed in 43 and saved all of these people's lives, because then people wouldn't have learned, have understood the full horrors of what it was all about. Germany had to hit rock bottom. It's a little bit like Alcoholics Anonymous, but it's on world historical scale. This idea that a person, a nation, a way of being has to hit rock bottom. It's like go all the way down before it can find the strength to pull itself out of the crisis it's in.
Yeah,
And if
not every alcoholic makes it. There's many that don't. So
that's right,
there's a dire danger.
yeah.
It's not a a mathematical equation that's going on.
I think the reason I was bringing it in there, just to round my thoughts off, and then I'd love for you to comment on it, is that rock bottom in Europe happened. It's like in the 1940s, and we see sort of a flourishing of lots of healthy democratic institutions. It's like a larger freedom of press and that type of thing. Not completely free, but it's like a lot freer. And this, but those healthy forces have been perverted, and Europe has to crumble and decay again, and it's decided to get itself involved in the Ukraine, there to show what it really is. Into like many of the terrible ways. I realize I'm not speaking, or I get the sense that I'm not speaking particularly clearly about points here.
I was just wondering, what did you mean? Europe has to get involved in Ukraine to show what it really is, to show what's what.
It has to destroy itself. It's destroying itself. We see it in Italy, we see it in Germany, we see it in France, we see it in Spain, we see it in the UK. We don't I've hardly recognized these countries anymore. I lived in Germany for 3 years, many years ago. These aren't democratic countries anymore. And these countries are, it's like democracy is dying. And I don't think we've seen the end of it. And it's the Ukraine conflict that's like brought that to a head, and nobody knows whether that's going to end in nuclear war. I mean, Biden the other day was saying that, well, we're changing our nuclear posture. We don't even need to have a nuclear attack by Russia if we're doing badly on the battlefield. I'm paraphrasing him, but that's like the nuclear stance policy is no. It's like tactical nuclear warheads are like they're in play now, and that brings the world closer to the brink of, well, it's annihilation, isn't it? And the first place that's going to get annihilated is Europe, and perhaps then the rest of the world. Like a bit doomy and gloomy here, but the full destruction is. In the same way that Europe was destroyed in the Second World War, that's sort of like a possible scenario that's out there, and which, bringing this all the way back to Sophia and Soloviev, he seems to be indicating, he's not giving any timeline, but he's giving this dynamic of Russia being it's like trying to absorb the healthy selfish impulses of the West, but the West falling into complete decadence and decay, but the Russians being capable of converting that intense selfishness into a Christianized sense of self, where we're working together. That's the picture he's creating, and this is from his conversations with Sophia. Sorry, that was an extremely long and unclear answer, but I hope it created a little bit of a picture of where some I think is going. Does that resonate with any of you guys, or do you see it completely differently from that?
Just to flesh it out a little bit more. Excuse me. What's in this narrative, where does America fall in that picture as relates to obviously narcissistic culture in a sense, in the Greek mythological sense of the use of that
Yeah. So I mean,
imagery.
he doesn't obviously Soloviev doesn't mention it, America in this context. He's talking about the West. But if we're talking about a state of mind, which is what I believe Soloviev is talking about,
Okay,
a
well,
way of viewing life.
Let's go back to Steiner, because Soloviev without Steiner is not going to be complete, in my opinion.
I agree.
One of the things Steiner says about America, particularly, is that, I'm not going to be really precise with the language, but something like America is ruled by death forces. So this goes to a and then I believe he's referring to this in relationship to, say, the Mexican mysteries, and the terrible stories coming from that, the images of
Blood
child sacrifice,
sacrifice.
yes, and the use of fear as a spiritual manipulation tool, and in the light of the riddles of philosophy and the evolution of consciousness, and also in direct opposition to what David said in the volley, I would say, is that it doesn't feel good to be in a state where death forces are a largely informing part of the soul experience. And I think we with the advent of the Christ event, that has to be recapitulated. That societies, the human experience is going to have to go through the ultimate
near-death experience.
Death experience, yes, and that's a terrible notion to consider. In not because there's death, and I want to avoid death at all costs or that sort of thing. That is the American healthcare system for sure, but but this obsession with let's say the death imagination is more than just the end of something. It's that the actual having to live through a recapitulation of the Christ's experience inside the actual material processes that are a complete eclipse, or a complete separation from, like, not only are we separate from nature, we're separating more and more from nature, not getting closer to her. And that is to go through the death process, which is necessary. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been one being that did it and then developed and then resurrected into the sphere of life so that we may do it as well. And so the way toward that death process or that destruction is maybe variant between the European soul cultural experience of societal death, but in a way, America is a forerunner of the death processes. I mean, we used the weaponry that devastated Japan, and we developed that weaponry in a way that nobody. Right, and then I'll just leave that there for now because I've got other things to say about that particular weaponry and the spiritual nature of that, which is subatomic. But
Yes, interesting to ask the question about America because if the sort of present moment since the birth of sort of more conscious awareness in Greece and then around the Mediterranean and then spreading sort of out from there is the kind of moment we're in now, and then that's on a rhythm of sort of about 3,500 years as cultures go. Then the Russian moment will be the next one after that. That's what Sophia would have been pointing to for Soliviev. And then the American
After that,
moment
yeah.
is the one after that. So, although now America,
But that's
maybe,
when the war of all against all comes, isn't it, Jonathan?
I don't remember, but
Yeah. I think I'm right, isn't it? Is that the way you see it, Jeff?
the thing is, because there's
No.
smaller rhythms in bigger rhythms, and so my memory slips on that. But after the American cultural moment, that is quite a defining point because that's the end of a cycle of 7,
Yeah.
and then we will be devolving in the sense of we've involved ourselves into matter, and then on a quite definite devolution from matter or evolution out of matter into a more spiritualized, into the living forces rather than the death forces. So there's a lot to it. It's interesting that at the moment, although there may be these kind of death forces reverberating, from Silicon Valley and so forth, from the West throughout the rest of the world, that's not the end of that story for America. So I just want to put that there, to sort of.
And another thing, Stone says it's like about the youth forces in America, that they are hugely important as well for the development. So even 100 years ago, he was describing how everything in Europe is based on tradition, and it's still like that. America has these youth forces. It's not so. Things aren't just done because that's the way we've been doing it for 500 or 1,000 years. So whilst the death forces, which are also responsible for our consciousness, are a real part of how the American group, soul, or nation contributes to world evolution, there's also the healthy youthful forces, the ability to take up also the Christ impulse and to fill it full of life. So it's so dangerous, isn't it, when you're talking about different countries, because you're tarring everybody, or it's easy to be perceived as tarring everybody with the same brush, and that's not the intent. We're trying to. We need to be more careful with our language so we can make it clear that we're talking about people who have this way of viewing the world, and these people who have this way of the world. What's going to be the natural evolution for those type of people? It's got nothing to do with. It's got little to do with nations. It's all about individuals uniting around worldviews.
Yeah, although it's dangerous to sort of get dangerous. I don't know what that means in this case, but it is risky or whatever, Philistine or dilettantish to sort of speak in broad swaths. It's also there are group souls, and there are presiding spirits of the age, and then these countries are individual and individualizing like everything else. And so, I mean, what did America give the world? It gave it a lot of things, but one of it is it gave it soul. It gave it Motown. It gave it jazz. It gave it the Delta blues. It gave it style. It gave it a uh, um, elevated persona. Which is a pale shadow of which is fame for fame's sake. Um, but uh, but those are just the outer trappings of
Yeah.
a developing soul in the world. And so I wonder what well, I mean, we're talking about in my terms, we're talking about the evolution of the soul, and we're talking about the riddles of philosophy. And what soul phase are we? What soul faculty is developing now? Is it? I mean, America is a very willful place as relates to its youthful forces, but it's yeah. I mean, for humanity, what soul forces are available, newly available, and developing at this moment?
I think that's what Stein is highlighting, isn't it? It's in the second part of the Riddles of Philosophy. We've got we've got like two main streams going on. We've got the individualization, the strong sense of self, and all the different like philosophical worldviews that can lead to. And it's taking its root back to, I mean, he talks about the wonderful thought structures of Giordano Bruno and Descartes and these type of people. These are people who live like intensely, it's like in the self, and they're strong enough to create worldviews out of themselves. And the egoism that we see today, it's both positively and negatively, is testimony of this, like this very clear development of what's going on in practically every soul on planet Earth. It's becoming individualized. It's living. I was going to say it's living more in itself, but I have to be careful. It's more aware of itself as being an individual being. Okay, I'm separate from the rest, as opposed to it's like a father Abraham and I are one. It's like group soul. This idea, or if you go back to like old Germanic tribes, it's like of the first centuries after Christ. So like the word I, it's like basically it doesn't exist, because I don't if I lived in that period, I experienced myself as part of a community. I didn't have an individual will. Whereas practically everybody, certainly people who've grown up in Western cultures, they've got a very developed sense of self. I create my life. I create my own life. I've got my own rights and I've got my own desires. Blah 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 blah. So this is one big stream that's going on in the philosophy, in the riddles of philosophy. And then the other stream that's going on is an awareness of I have an inner life that is, and how does that relate to the outside world? Also, how does not just the outside world? How does that relate to the outside world? How does that relate to it's like the whole of evolution? What is this being living inside me that's separating itself off? It's like in a certain direction, but is also suffering the consequences of not being able to find a firm foothold in the world. I think these are the two. Those are like the two main streams for me that are going on in part two. What do you guys think?
Yeah, and they're intimately linked because the moment you're like, I am me, a unique and individual being, the next question is, so how do I relate, if at all possible, to everything else? What is faculty or faculties within me enable that to happen, so that I'm not just lost in my own soup. And there's, I think we're in a bit of a risky moment in that the sense of self, and people looking around saying, okay, I am me, so what's my special thing? Everybody's kind of like trying to sort of furrow a speciality, put themselves out there. This is me, and I'm different, sort of thing, or at least this is what I can do. But but we could get lost in that, if we each try to find our own individual specific specialization. And I'm not quite sure the sort of the relationships between this, but there's also a more kind of generic question, which is what distinguishes us from the animals? What distinguishes us from the plants? What distinguishes us from the earth? And what we've been studying is that's something that is generic in all of us, yet appears in an individual way, and is something that does set us out quite distinctly from the animals. To sort of mention our closest cousins. So once you are, or once you've found yourself as a sort of unique being, the next question then is, what do you do?
Go shopping.
Yeah.
I'm interested in also the inspired by that, actually, Jonathan, by the question then, since we are unique beings, and it is intimately involved in it is intimacy that makes it so that we are involved as a universal being, and we can't get there unless it's deeply, until the portal, the way through the Father is me, right? And that's me, and that's you, and that's you, and that's the I am. And so that I am experience is a deeply personal and intimate experience, and what it allows for is a world religion. Really, it's no longer a religion that is of a particular culture, or it doesn't. Let's say, I don't think that religions do belong to particular cultures, but they arose in the cultures that they arose in because of the configuration of that culture as the ideal vessel for something. And who was it that said that in pre-modern times God was everywhere, modern times God was nowhere, and then in the future God will be everywhere again? I think it was Ken Wilber who said that. Maybe, I'm not sure, but what's meant by that, I think, is that in a prepared world where globalization has paved the way for a planetary world culture, there will be, I think what we're learning now is that there will be a religion, and it will be a religion that is shared by everyone. Now, whether that's good or bad, I don't know, because science is a kind of religion that just unified the whole globe into a mass insanity to follow stupid ideas, in contrary to their common sense and their
To be fair, not
intuitive common
science, but
sense.
scientism, that would be, if as a religion, I would argue.
I agree, but that's the way it plays out as a religion.
Okay.
I guess.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, spiritual science is ironically would not qualify in that sense of to be a religion. And I'm not even saying religions are that religion is bad. I don't mean to imply that at all, but but a religion that doesn't see itself as a religion, but masquerades as some sort of objective knowledge is problematic, of course. And so there's going to be what we just witnessed over the last 3 years is an amazing mobilizing of the world as a whole, in really terrible ways, but still, it was a mobilization of the world as a whole.
And a deeply, deeply fascinating, because I think certainly what I've experienced, and I'd love for you guys to comment as well, is how it's watching how people have navigated the last 2-3 years is a little bit like it's a real statement of who you are. It's just as a simplistic analogy. When YouTube started censoring people for certain content, these people, they were actually proud that they had been censored by YouTube. They were wearing it as a badge of honor. I have quite clearly been doing something the powers that be don't like, therefore it must be good. If it wasn't harmful to their intents, they wouldn't be censoring me. And I think when you talk to people who've talked through their own experience of how the inability to communicate with the other side, it's like a complete rejection of, let's talk about, you present your facts, I'll present my facts, and we'll try to agree. It's become so tribal in a deeply fascinating way, in a way that I think most people couldn't believe was possible in Western minds, but it's become completely tribalized, and that is so fascinating to see how deep it goes. And then the Italian guy that I was mentioning a little while back, it's like one of his recent articles, which is called Blood Brothers. He was saying, if we want to get to know really the quality of people's ability to think, one of the best questions that we can ask anybody at this moment is, what's your take on the jab? What's your take on this disease? Will they just cite, repeat, regurgitate what BBC, RAI, or wherever, MSNBC, what they're saying? Or are they able to argue against themselves, or talk about counter arguments to what they're saying? And if they can't, then that already tells us a lot about the ability of that person to actually to think critically about things. But bringing it back, you guys might want to pull that up, but I'm going to bring it back to this conversation about riddles of philosophy. With it's because it's in anthroposophy, it's called the consciousness soul period, which runs from 1400 to 3500 AD, and then the Russian epoch begins, or cultural epoch happens. But what is interesting, so the name consciousness soul, what is it that we're becoming conscious of? It's consciousness of the fact that we are spiritual beings. And I think this is also, as you go deeper into asking yourselves questions about the nature of your soul, obviously you can move in one direction, see how it's tied to everything that's material, everything that's given by the senses, and it's like the wonders of science and technology and that type of thing, this wonderful world that exists there. But as you go deeper, another world also opens up. It's that those pictures are a lot less clear because we haven't developed further states of consciousness, but that's the other side that's also opening up to humanity. And so consciousness the consciousness soul, it means we've already got consciousness of our physical awareness, of our material. It's like how we're embedded in the material realm. But consciousness of actually being spiritual, monads, to take a Leibniz word, that's not very well developed in many people. But that's where this that's where the next like 1500 1600 years, where the focus of development is going to be. And that means it's like further developments in psychology for understanding this other side of us that is a reality.
It's interesting that. Oh, go ahead, Jeffrey.
I was just going to say that the children are an indicator here of this. I was tripped across somebody I've been meaning to engage this morning on YouTube. It was his name's Kim John Payne. He's an American Waldorf consultant educator, really adult educator, and he was saying that I think we have to see like doctors doing clinical work, that they're doing research, that the teachers are doing research on the changing human development, and he was saying that that the children now are developing a clairsentience, and the way in which what that it's not clairvoyance, it's a developing clarity about being able to read somebody else's feelings, essentially. And then and so it's really important. He used the example of, there's a lot of parenting books out there, and that the author tends to take an expertise role, and the parent a subordinate role to that. And then the parents, they might be good ideas, but they're not it's not their own ideas. And then the parents act as if they're using the language of somebody else, and they act as if there's it's their words, but it's not their words. They're saying things that they connected with on some level, but that aren't true in a certain sense. They might be true taken from the author's perspective, but until they're until people can stand on the authority of their own thinking processes, children are seeing this. And so what does that mean at large, right? I mean, we mentioned the whole medical conformity fiasco, but in what way will that further evolution in children? Like they're it's sort of it's coming to the point of coming to a head. It's like that they see right past all of this stuff because their parents are mouthing things that they don't own, that aren't their own ideas. And that could be DEI, social justice ideology capture, could be right-wing fundamental reactionaryism to the civilization collapse that's going on culturally, and they could be in any case. It doesn't really matter. It's the medium is the message there, and the medium is blah 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 blah, and that's not, and the child being like, that's not reality. Reality's down deeper, down there,
Yeah.
down low in the deep recesses.
Yeah, I'm going to say something really harsh here, because it seems to me, from what you
Yes.
just said, that the children are faced with two choices. So in a sense, it would be a separation of the sheep from the goats, or the wheat from the chaff, because either they're going to, because the institutions, and everything set up is full of all this BS, and they can see through it, they can feel through it. So either they're going to have to be alone within that, and slowly find others, peers that, or you just join the group. And we've seen that in the last 2.5, 3 years, that so many people don't want to feel alone, and like, hang on, everything around me is insane. What's wrong with the world? They'd rather just go with the crowd because there's comfort and security in that. So, I'm basically saying that it's wonderful to hear what you're saying about the children, but it also means it's a testing time. These are testing times.
Very, very testing times. But I think also then that what will stick out is those authentic adults. I really like the point you're making there, Jeff, that it's not the words that come out of the mouth that are important. It's whether they are grounded really in the person. That is the A and the O of it. So like, and if the children, working at a school, if the pupils don't see you as authentic, they see right through you. But those that are authentic, they actually gain a lot of respect in the school because they really stick out. So their BS meters are really good, and that is really positive. And as long as they can find just like a handful of adults like in their environment, so that they sense that sort of like we're not just making this up, guys. We've got like older, smarter people who are also saying you're onto something. Follow it. Put your energy, put your youthful forces into that. I had to.
It's a tricky one because children also they crave. I don't want to say power. It's not quite the right word, but they crave, especially young children. They're looking for people that are effective in the world. Do you know what I mean? That is like a guiding line for them. And speaking for myself, I'm not one of those because I spent my whole life trying to cut through the BS that I was given, but not being strong enough myself, for whatever reason, just to sort of nevertheless to forge the way. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I think it sounds like to me it would be quite difficult for these kids because there's many people that see through the BS, many adults, but they're not necessarily able to sort of band together and build effective institutions. Not least because that there's definite attempts to stamp all that out.
I see it much more as seed sowing. Really, when you're dealing with youths, what you're doing is you're opening their minds just to there are other alternatives, so that if in their 20s or later they sort of like look back to their youth and sort of say, you remember that crazy teacher when he said to us this? I know why he said it now. And that is the type of strength that they can get out of it. They're not going to act on it now. It will just be something quirky, something unusual, something a bit wacky that a teacher says, and it's like makes them look up. And you can see it immediately when you're saying things that other teachers don't say. They suddenly start up. They ask loads of questions. They're interested in a different way. There's a different hush about the class. It's very interesting, and it gives hope. I mean, perhaps I'm deluding myself a little bit here, but it gives hope that all these kids that I'm teaching, that when they're older, they'll look back and go, oh gosh, that guy was talking about the thing that I'm interested in now, and that will give them the sense of security that perhaps I'm onto something. It's not about convincing them yet and getting them to act, although wonderful that would be if it were the case. But that's not the point at this stage in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
There's just much in that. What I hear in Jonathan is kind of saying is, what if there are no adults like that? Do you know what I mean? So if there are no adults like that, and they're left with this sentient, grasp of the reality of the situation, right into the soul of the adults around them, and then don't have anything to can't. That's a terrible experience for them to have, because then there's no trust in authority, and that's already a problem we're seeing, right? Is the legitimacy crisis at the level of authority, and that's what Zach Stein talks about, is the teacherly authority of intergenerational transfer. So we've got the potential for a a divide between the adult world and the world of children that is in some senses growing. But the good news in this sense is that it is clairsentience that they're developing in this consciousness soul age toward the life spirit age, and or spirit self. Which comes first, spirit self or life?
Consciousness, soul, spirit, self. Yeah,
spirit in the spirit self age. In that, when they experience this, it's not a matter of a of them taking hold of that knowledge necessarily, and organizing a new way to be adults from childhood, but that they are having an experience that's available to all people who are having the same experience perceptually in it without talking about it. So in a sense, it's the monkeys on the island, the learning to use a tool, and all of the monkeys simultaneously in a morphogenic field or something like that learn to use the tool without being taught, right? So there is this collective intelligence, and this is the thing that I think, if there's conspiring going on as relates to thwarting, it is the existential reality of collective intelligence inherent and beginning to awaken for humanity, and the children are the great indicators of that, and the enemy of the state, frankly.
Okay, we're three monkeys on an island as well, aren't we? Because we've been reading a book and we've been trying to develop ourselves. We've been reading. We've read 7. We're on the 17th chapter, and I think we've taken 14 or 15 weeks to read it. What are some of the changes that are happening in us as a part of this process? Because it's been it's been intense for me. It's been very interesting. But what about you guys? If you were describing for your wives or whoever that was interested, they aren't necessarily interested. How would you describe this change that's come about just as a result of reading this book, The Riddles of Philosophy?
Well, shall I go? For me, apart from increasing I'm trying to find the right word, not crystallization, not like concretation, but something on this, so that it's well, it's mainly about the community for me. So apart from reading a lot myself and thinking a lot myself, within the community there's something that becomes a lot more alive in my experience. And then beyond that, it is the sense of having found a community, and it's my firm conviction that this is the start of a community. I'm not saying an exclusive community, but we're like, if you like, laying seeds now for work, even though we may not be together geographically now. We will be together in the future, after life, and so forth. It feels like that, that there's so it's beyond nation, it's beyond gender, it's beyond all these things, but there's having met sort of kindred spirits.
for me, I resonate completely with what you just said, Jonathan. The um, the it's it's what matters. Like, I don't really know that much about Angus and where he teaches and that sort of thing, and I'd like to know, and I think that we'll get to that. But we're getting to what's important first. Do you know what I mean? And that's my favorite kind of relationship anyway, right? It's like those other things are uh, um, further reasons to um, care for someone. Um, uh, but this book is psychoactive in a way that I don't remember it being for me before, and I think it has to do with the group work, and then having to go through this process of representing it uh, um, by having a genuine discussion and discovery process associated with it, so that because the book itself is a path of discovery for Rudolf Steiner. It's clear that to me. Like I never thought about it in those terms, and I'm sure when we read Philosophy of Freedom, we'll find the same. And as a matter of fact, somebody did mention that recently that Steiner commented on the book being a uh, um, the Philosophy of Freedom meaning being a a process and methodology of discovery that he was in and of itself was discovering that was the case as he was doing it, something like that. And there's so little of that nowadays. Everything's sort of presented in complete form, and we've really allowed ourselves to be able to um, um, reach down in our own experience and soul life and thinking processes in order to genuinely come up with a better and better understanding and more clear and clear understanding. And the feeling that agents that the f- the f- yeah, the feeling that we're working with something that it is psychoactive, and that it's not just psychoactive for me, and it's not just psychoactive for the three of us, but that it's really potentially psychoactive for everyone, um, whether they know it or not,
It's
on a sentient level. That we are universally connected, but we have to actually um, make the connection within ourselves first somehow.
I think it's wonderful that this chapter we're on now is where Nietzsche makes an appearance, and he makes the appearance that this is a fellow that didn't just think through these things, but he didn't encounter science, the theory of evolution, as that's an illuminating idea. He felt it in his bones, in his life, in his encounters with the people he met. It was the life for him, not just that, but other, and he went through, so just wonderful, to feel that. And the sense I got was that Rudolf Steiner recognized that in him, because Rudolf Steiner had that same experience himself. He was. I'm thinking what I'd love to do is imagine those cafes back in that time when Rudolf Steiner and all these other like young fellows and the older professors, guys and writers and that, they would just pop down a cafe, and it'd be the cafe in Vienna, and if you went there, you knew you would meet people that were having a discussion that you would not want to leave all night, sort of thing. Imagine if we could open something like that on the internet, where all the Vivekis could, might just pop in or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Because that's it's open to everyone, but there's going to be some interesting conversations going on. But and I'm thinking, so Rudolf Steiner sitting there quietly, listening to everybody and everything that's going on, and like with Nietzsche, feeling it so deeply that it's not just in the air, but it's in his soul. and through through this studying with you guys and the other people and with this material, beginning to get a sense that that's a beginning to be, it's a possible, it's like a reality for oneself. It's I guess it's a sort of sense of vivification of the soul, rather than just shuffling along day to day from all the necessary things.
How about you, Angus?
Gosh, it's been dramatic. I'm in total agreement of everything that you guys have said, and could have talked warmly about those processes as well. I think if I was going to choose, and this is as important. This is as important. I was going to say it's a close second fiddle, but this is hugely important that we're able to do this together. It's like you living in the States, Jonathan in Rome, me in Sweden, and Sophia in Australia. This ability, like you're saying, of cafe-like culture coming together. We just like talking because we know we're going to talk about something that is of importance to us. I think that's humongous. It really is. It's living here in Sweden. Alex mentioned it in the last but one meeting. Sweden, sorry all the Swedes, if anybody ever listens to this, Sweden, it's a cultural desert. Is my own personal experience of it. I mean, I'm not saying that there might be places, but I just don't have access to it. And then to be able to meet people out in the world who are really interested, engaged, and even more importantly, want to dig deeper, and not just say they want to dig deeper, but they do. They put in the hours, they read the books, they have these conversations, they inform themselves so that next time you come back to the conversation, they've got something new and interesting to add that they weren't able to say the time before. But that wasn't what I was going to say. As you know, I've been really homing in on this anthroposophia thing, which we get to in the next chapter. And next time the four of us get together with Sophia, we're going to be looking at the historical process that we just mapped out in a lot more detail. And I've been living with that content quite intensively for the last month or so. And that is... do you remember when I talked about Boetius? It's like his experiences in the cell before he was going to be executed. So I've read these stories where people have really come into contact with what they, out of their own experience, describe as a real being. And as I deepen into this process, thinking becomes so much more than some weird activity that happens in us. Thanks to digging into this book, it's becoming the experience of something that I develop a relationship to, and the stronger that relationship develops, the more that being is able to share with me its infinite wisdom. I mean, I'm infinite's up there, and I'm down here. I'm at the bottom of the screen, but that doesn't matter. I feel that I'm growing. The most important thing, I feel, wow. And I go to a sauna every Saturday and chuck myself. I had to break the ice open this week before I could jump in, so that was fun. But we had we had a conversation a couple of weekends ago where this guy was saying it's like how time goes so quick when you're an adult. So he's retired, and he says it's like the years just go by and I don't know what's going on. And another guy in there, he knows that it's like I can go on a little bit, so off on a philosophical train of thought. He said, "So Angus, what do you think?" And I said to him, look, that's not my experience of it. And I think if you actually started thinking about all the things that you've done this week, you would actually begin to understand how amazingly much you have done this week. And I contrasted it with sort of like how we tend to act when we're young and when we're old. And so I was explaining to them that's like, if you actually sort of begin to, instead of just letting life sort of like roll on by, but you actually start activating your memory, hugely important if you're going to get to know your soul. You've got to like be able to review yourself. So if you review your day or if you review your week, you start to become aware of, wow, has that just happened? That whole process in a week. And the guy that's like quarter of an hour before had been saying, it's like my time so like just goes by without like anything happening. He said to me, he said, God, you're right. When I actually think about all the things I've done this week, so much has happened, but people need to be encouraged to sort of like start to use their memory. And I feel I got a little bit off topic here because my point was, for my own experience of reading this book is so much has happened just in the last 14 weeks, and the development of what feels like a real relationship with something, as something I can hardly describe, but it's real. It is definitely real. And I had no idea that that's what I was letting myself in for. When a friend of mine I was involved with Tom Last for a little while, a guy that I knew through that group, he's like contacted me. He said, "Oh, Angus, you remember this Matt guy that you like told me about that I should watch? That you thought he was good." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, he's got a group going on the Riddles of Philosophy. I thought I'd let you know." So it was wonderful. This person that I'd only met to like a couple of times, out of the blue, got in contact with me. I said, "It's like, try this," and here we are, the three of us, having these conversations on a regular basis, and all feeling that isn't life richer thanks to the process that we're going through. That's certainly my experience, a richer life.
And not least because, as you said, you've been putting some effort in. It's not just like we've been sitting down watching a movie and then chatting about it.
Yeah.
Although, that can be very fruitful too, but then one's kind of watching a movie a certain way.
Yeah.
Not just vegetating.
Yeah. But it's interesting, the format. How varied when you get, there are often 12 people in the group. And like you were talking about, Jeff, the variety is very stimulating because you feel yourself resonating strongly with certain people, connecting with their thought processes, and it's like able to somehow absorb it. And then other things that are said in the group, you're just going, so I said it's like, wow, gosh, you and I read the same book, and that's where it took your thinking. I find that process so fascinating, rewarding as well.
I agree with that for sure. Yeah.
That's where I like the thing that the sense I have of that these are companions that will become companions in future lives and so forth, because we've all kind of like met in something that, at least in a portion of our life is very important to us, and so that's bound to reverberate again, let's say. But even though some people are coming at it from a very different direction, it's kind of interesting. Excellent. So we're going to be together again, even though we got quite different views on this. This thing that we're talking about. It's going to be really interesting. I'm imagining like the crew on a ship, and everybody's got different skills and different roles.
Jeff, it
Yeah,
looked like you would say. Yeah.
I'm just blown away by his Steiner's enthusiasm in relationship to Nietzsche. First of all, because he's the only other person that has had that kind of enthusiasm besides myself, and that I've experienced, for one thing. And then the way he writes in a way that is just as alive as the way Nietzsche wrote about Nietzsche, which is a pretty powerful thing. And then so this will be fun. This will be a fun one, I think, when we go into it. But also it points to philosophy of freedom, because in the end, when he was talking about Nietzsche, he said Nietzsche only points to something. And that was my experience as well. And then I read the Philosophy of Freedom after following the end of Nietzsche's finger, because that was the only person who took that up. He took all of that up that Nietzsche brought as a gift, as a troubled soul, as somebody so alive in his soul, brought, and then Steiner brings this an incredibly similar personal passion with an unparalleled discipline and clarity of care for every single thinker that he engages with, and then reaches their limit, and then shows you where they go, where to re-enliven their limit across the threshold. He takes them across the threshold, and that's going to be an experience that we're going to have as a group when we read this. And Riddles of Philosophy is a perfect soul preparation for that, I think.
Yeah. Building on what you're saying there as well, that's one of the other things that's become abundantly clear is in the Philosophy of Freedom, which I have read a lot of times. So there's Hammerling that came up in the last chapter. I mean, obviously Hegel you've heard about, but many of these more like Fechner came up as well. These people makes like a little cameo appearance in the Philosophy of Freedom, and you really don't understand, because Stein's using them to make like one little point in there to develop, so like that, it's like that the process of the thinking that's going to guide you to an awareness of the exceptional state, what it really is as a spiritual experience. But with the prepping of the Riddles of Philosophy, those people have so much more to give you when you. I'm really looking forward to reading it again, despite the fact that I know the majority of the chapters, the key points, and I'm not going to do it now, but I've stuck it in my memory so that it's accessible, so like in order. But rereading it again and reading those names, having now like nourished my soul with sort of like what they represented in this whole, it's like stream from early Greek thought through to where we are today, feels like it's going to add a completely different dimension. And I'm looking forward to starting that hugely.
One thing I might mention, because you asked our experience with the book, The Riddles of Philosophy, is and you were speaking about the stream, and I agree with that. But something that's really highlighted my reading of it this time is that he hasn't gone strictly chronological. So he goes each chapter sort of represents a particular kind of development, and often I think perhaps if I look back, and it would often be kind of like what Hegel might call thesis antithesis. So
yeah, there's a polarity in there, isn't there? Definitely,
polarity, that's the word. Yeah. And then but it's not just a single polarity, but it moves on, and so you'll find in this chapter there's folks from like 1836, whereas in the prior chapter, there's folks from 1865. So it doesn't necessarily go chronologically, but it gives a real sense, because of that, of this real life going on, in the whole era. It's not just, you can't just track it on a graph like that. It's like there's a development here. I was going to say like an organelle or something, and then there's one later, well, no, it's not quite like that, because it's the time is not linear. So some people that are 30, 50 years apart are intimately related in many aspects of their thought. And so you can imagine a note sounded there, and then the same note occurs later on here, and in between there's been lots of other notes, and then they all kind of sound further on too. Yeah, it's fascinating to imagine that life, in the individual souls within the group souls.
I have a question that I've been meaning to ask, and presumably the last time the three of us met, I was going to ask that question, but it wasn't living in me at the time, so it was felt out of context to ask it. And that is, I guess it's three parts. The question one is, what is this impulse that is the evolution of consciousness? How does the evolution of consciousness and how does it how is it related to not just the evolution of consciousness, the what evolution of consciousness represents? How is it related to the Darwinian and the neo-Darwinian idea of evolution? And I think I understand why they're not in contrast or a conflict, except for neo-Darwinists do suggest that there's no such thing as the evolution of consciousness. They can conclude that. But when they speak of evolution, they're speaking of the model that has the soul as an epiphenomenon. I know that's a difference, but how can they be conjoined? He does that a little bit in chapter 12 of Philosophy of Freedom, but since the narrative is so fresh and there's so many people who use there's the Brett Weinsteins and the John Vervaekes and the Jordan Petersons who use evolutionary biology to ground their psychology, say, in something that they can then as a model to tell a story very effectively, often, and very meaningfully. What is the relationship of the evolution of consciousness with this neo-Darwinian picture of evolution? I guess I just asked the question like three times.
Well, what occurred to me as you were saying it, I hadn't quite sort of seen it that way before, but one way of looking at that, I think, and it's very apposite, is that it's, in a sense, it's what is there's the evolution of consciousness, and the Darwinian evolution is like just a portion of that. So what I'm trying to say is that the evolution of consciousness is the whole thing, and so for consciousness to evolve, you require like matter to come into being and so forth, and all the steps up to that. So because before I've had the same kind of questions to you, so I was trying to think, okay, you got the Darwinian evolution, the evolution of forms here, got evolution of consciousness here. How can I sort of glue them together? But now I'm thinking, no, the evolution of consciousness is kind of the whole body, and the Darwinian thing is just a view of a bit of it.
Well, yes. I mean, I agree with you. I think if I were globalizing my perspective, that's also what I would say.
And you couldn't do it the other way around. That's the point with that.
Yes, yes. But it's when you listen to somebody who's has facility with telling the human story via grounded in Darwinian, neo-Darwinian evolutionary model, say, it's very effective and convincing. Not not uh, uh, not the least of which is that they're making effective statements about the world that are extraordinarily meaningful and helpful, but also that the way in which evolution occurred was a selection process, and the technologies were um, like technologies, for example, were the defining factor in the way in which we evolved. Um, so here's a Daniel Schmachtenberger riff. He'll say. So human beings. This is an oversimplification, but it'll do. Human beings developed the plow. The plow changed their relationship with animism because they had to bring the ox in and yoke it to the plow and beat it all day in order for it to do the work. And so they couldn't see the cow as sacred anymore. So they had to get rid of their animism, and that also overturned a matriarchal society because
Mm.
men had to do the plowing because their upper body strength was greater, and the evolutionary process is selected for that. And you can see where that goes, and
Yeah, but
it's clear, and it's really a powerful way to look
yeah,
at it. But it starts to be so blanketed and defining and convincing that I don't know where where the I don't there's no seam in there to put to find the evolutionary conscious the evolution of consciousness as the impulse that developed the plow in the first place.
yeah, exactly.
But
Because for them, it's simply a matter of adaptation to a need. We need more food. I got to dig this soil, and I need a
but
better way to do it, sort of thing.
and it also defines the religion as a tool, like it was the plow, right? And so it was just
Exactly.
constructed.
Those are really irrelevant. They're just serving. Exactly. They are like the plow, serving those basic physical needs. But
Mm.
that's why I'm saying it's inside the evolution of consciousness. So so the question then is, how can you turn them inside out so that they can then see? Do you know what I mean? Because they're kind of focused in like this, but that's all inside a greater thing, and they won't see it while they're just all focused inward on this one ideal. I don't know how that
What they're
into
using is they're using invisible ideas to justify something for which there's evidence, and they're not able to show any connection. So they talk. I'm going to do the giraffe with a long neck. Okay, so why has a giraffe got a long neck? Because sort of like however million years ago, there was an animal that wanted to reach a little bit higher in a tree. Yeah. Okay. So on the surface, it's a nice story. Sounds reasonable? But hold on. What's that thing you just invented? It's got a need to reach higher. Where does that come from? What is a need? How is a need related to sort of like physiognomy and that type of thing? And already there, you are in as like an inner process, which has they can't show any connection between that and any chemical reaction that goes on. They can show parallels, but they can't show a connection because it's an inner life.
Yeah, but they're a bind because you're trying to point to something spiritual that we reach through thinking, and something that we experience as thinking and thought, that is the linking thing in these things. But because they've already decided that that's just like an epiphenomenal, and the important thing is the bubbling chemicals in the intestinal tract that
This is
needs
where
to be fed. They're never going to allow it to be the deciding factor, even though it is, and it's quite obvious from outside that it is the deciding
but
factor.
I'm going to take us all the way back to the beginning of this conversation when I was talking about my experiences with talking about that thing which you don't talk about, which apparently you are allowed to talk about now. It's not so like censored. There are some people, it doesn't matter how many facts you give them, it doesn't matter how convincing the research is, they have made up their mind. They do not want to know. I mean, you can talk to people that have got an open mind, but if we want to try and convince like a Richard Dawkins as a stereotypical, like die in the world, neo-Darwinian, why bother? Why bother? Wait until he actually becomes hungry. I was speaking to somebody the other day, and he was actually reflecting on the fact that Dawkins has actually become sort of like somewhat softer because of all the conversations he's had. I'm not sure to what extent, because I did sort of like stop watching him probably about 15 years ago. But I mean, we. I think you choose which level you want to fight the battle on, and those people that are fighting with that issue themselves will be battling with those people. How can I explain it more clearly?
Their immediate neighbours.
If you think you can do it with pure reason alone, I think you're misguided, and I think the COVID experience is like perfect case material to show, to exemplify why reason can only take you so far. It's because if somebody has decided they do not like your message, irrelevant whether there's any truth to it or not, we've all experienced it firsthand that it doesn't matter. They have made up their mind, and life is going to have to teach them a lesson before they might revisit the question.
Life has the ultimate trump card, which is death. Do you know what I mean? So if you're a nut that never allows yourself to be cracked, at the end of the day, you will be cracked. Life will just crumble you apart. And then you are released. And then, you can go through a whole process and then come back and go, I might think about that in a different way.
It's just that there's so much at stake right now, in my opinion, and there's so much that could be accomplished at this moment. And as I see, Dawkins is one person. I agree with that. Daniel C. Dennett's another one, and but then there are people like Vervaeke, for example, who are operating in the field of psychology, already taking the phenomenology of the soul seriously enough to examine it and think about it and study it and do psychometrics, and fantastic work comes out of that. And they're so close. That's the thing. They're just so. Their reason has brought them to the boundary that would actually put them in the paradigm shift that would allow for a witnessing of a reversal of the notion that the soul is an epiphenomenon of long biological processes, and that intelligence and self-consciousness and all of that just arose as forms of arose as forms that need to be taken seriously, but and I'm glad that they think that. Yet the key, the seed, is in the origin of how these ideas come up, and how and the continuity that they have right off into that which is transcendent, of the paradigm that they're operating within. So I just think.
Tell me a little bit more about Vervaeke. I don't know his work. Is he an academic, or is he just somebody with a deep passion? But
Yeah.
when I see you nodding your head, one of the automatic thoughts as I go, the strictures of working in an academic environment. I think I because I know so little about him, I can well imagine. I'm going to give another example where I know a lot more. Chomsky. I mean, he's an amazingly interesting thinker who, for the last 20 years, has become intellectually bankrupt. He was capable of critical thinking concerning US policy. He was very vocal about it, and rightly so. He was a darling of the left because he spoke truth to power. But it was always sort of like restricted, but he was still able to tell enough truth for it to be interesting. But in the last 20 years, I think, if my opinion, obviously, if you look at the work of Chomsky, it's like on anything substantive, and I'm going to talk about COVID here. I mean, he's on film. I saw it recently. I think it was Ivor Cummins highlighted this, a piece of old footage, it's like a year or so ago, where basically saying Chomsky more or less was saying, well, those people who don't get vaccinated, they have no right to any of the fruits of society. This is a left-wing thinker. This is an anti-war thinker who is so morally bankrupt. He thinks it's okay to just let people die and not give them hospital care because they haven't taken a jab that he thinks is okay. And I think these are the strictures of power. Now, I'm not saying anything like that for Viveki, but just like recognizing that if you are successful in society, they have strings on you. Who knows how far they go with all of these people. And it could be they genuinely, where they are in their life. I mean, if we look at our own lives, how we've developed, how it's like things that we previously didn't think were interesting or perhaps even rejected 10 years later. So we've seen them with new eyes and we realize, okay, now we're ready to take this next step on the path towards understanding life a little bit better. And all of these people that we're talking about, with the exception of Chomsky, he's going in the opposite direction. I mean, they've still got their lives ahead of them where this development that you're wishing for is still a possibility, but they're just not there yet. Whether or not they'll get there, that's we don't know. But we could hope, because they are influential voices who, if they did change their mind, could reach a lot more people and spread the life-enhancing ideas.
Yeah. He is his, just to fill in a little bit, he's a psychology in the cognitive science department, I believe, in the University of Toronto, and he teaches spiritual practices, and he teaches an ecology. Actually, he refers to it as an ecology of spiritual practices, and he's broken the bounds of his restrictions as relates to his university. So he's in pretty good shape there, and it probably helped that Jordan Peterson was his colleague and
Right.
went his way in relationship with making it impossible for himself to be in the university, but probably stretched what was allowable. And then John Vervaeke became a public intellectual because of it. And what Vervaeke's doing is exposing himself to many different perspectives, including people who aren't bound by university strictures in their thinking. And Zach Stein is one, and Daniel Schmachtenberger, who's a complete autodidact. I mean, he never occupied a university position. Zach Stein did at Harvard, but Zach Stein can't be contained by the university. But Zach Stein entertains Rudolf Steiner, and that's one place that John Vervaeke won't go. And he said it,
Right. Yeah.
right? And but still, there's just this web of people who are touching upon each other and offering, in some senses, useful constraints so that they can be in conversation, mutually respecting each other's perspectives. So, um, yeah, I don't know. I I don't think that the Vervaeke's heading in the same direction as Chomsky is, uh, and I think there are reasons why Chomsky fell prey, is because he's a political thinker,
Mhm.
a materialist as relates to linguistics, for example. He's not reading Steiner's Genius of Language, for example.
Yeah,
Yeah. He's
yeah.
not thinking about the the organs of speech being reproductive organs in a future evolution, for example. Um, so, but I do think there's the possibility of without actually getting it's I find it encouraging that there's a plethora of public intellectuals that are able to reach the very edge of anthroposophy in a I would say as a
Mm.
as a phenomenological reality in the world. Um, so, but in any case, it's evolution is the was the question, and it's very useful in to think about evolution like um, uh, we think of human beings as in some senses as not we as an us, but in some senses cynically, like human nature, it's Hobbesian, brutish and all of that stuff, uh, and uh, we think of that, but in doing so, we lose sight of ubiquitous conditioning as influential of the way human nature is. Like, oh, everybody conform. That's what human beings are. They're sheep, right? Well, they're sheep that have that are conforming in relationship to a training that they had in public school systems that eliminated thinking um, as part of their process. And these people are doing important thinking using the evolutionary biology model
Explain it.
frame it. Yes, and it's helpful as a leaping off point. But it just that one, okay, so let's engage in the evolution of consciousness and talk about why the plow was developed, um, uh,
Mhm.
and what was needing to come in, made what was needing to what what spiritual experience was needing to find room where the animistic picture wasn't allowing for at that point in evolution.
Angus, do you know the German words for strength and elasticity of thinking? Because maybe these fellows, they have the strength, but for some reason they just haven't got the elasticity. I don't know if there's a better word in
Yeah, he probably does use Elastizität in German,
okay,
and
but
Stärke would
but
be the.
it's very indicative, isn't it, of a certain stretchability, and you can stretch elastic any direction. It's not confined to a certain direction. You can,
He
it
often
has to
talks
sort of
about.
follow itself. You pull it that way, and it can only go so far in the opposite direction, but it can go in all directions. And
I think
so I
fear
think
is.
that's
Sorry.
the answer. That it's in the Riddles of Philosophy. Just as I said, it's all there, but there's not quite the strength and elasticity of thinking to take the final step necessary.
I think there's another force in there, and I think it's fear. Why do I think that? If you begin to think about like all the uncertainties, they begin to enter your mind once you leave the safety of natural scientific thinking. That this crazy world of spirit, all like the billions of different ways and things that have been written about it, and you've got a personal responsibility to forming your own relationship to this material without any church to guide you, without any scientific institution, without anybody to tell you whether you're on the right or the wrong path. It's all your own work.
That's a good point.
I think if somebody had told me that before I started, I thought I'm not sure I'd have ventured off down that path. Now, 30 years later, I'm so glad that I did. But I do think I think you mentioned important things, strength and elasticity of thinking. But I think fear is a real aspect in there that's like I can't touch that. It's too much for me at the moment. It'll take me too far away from like perhaps the goals that I have, like with the particular field that I'm involved in, and sometimes fear is a warranted response. Perhaps these people do need to gain enough inner strength before they can overcome this fear, or it's like a fortunate. A fortunate meeting with karma. I don't know. I think there are lots of factors, but
it almost doesn't matter in light of that. It almost doesn't really matter what the fear is. It's just that it is fear. Some of the fear is not being taken seriously by your peers, being pigeonholed as airy fairy or woo woo, or these terms that people use as relates to spiritual reality manifesting in soul and physiological realities. So yeah, fear. That's a point well taken. Fear and security, as we see throughout this book, actually throughout the Riddles of Philosophy, people make those choices because of personal issues, essentially, something like that. Just as Nietzsche made a very productive choice from a deeply personal standpoint, and his limits were set by his own personal
configuration of soul.
Characterological predisposition.
That's the one.
Being pissed off.
And also perhaps his timing. I don't know, but because anthroposophy was born later, he would have been, I don't know, in his 60s when anthroposophy came along, and then he might have been able to find an entry, maybe not because he was such a sort of a standalone individual, but he could have taken up the path in a way that it didn't break him.
Yeah, he was alone on the world stage. Being alone with your ideas is without peers. That's not easy to do, right? This is what we were talking about with the psychoactivity of mutuality in idea creation. He's a special case for sure. As relates to him this is a side question. You, Angus, presented Ernst Haeckel's commentary on the original version of Riddles of Philosophy. Was that in the original publication or an original publication of the work?
He wrote a foreword or something? Front page, and it's on there.
Wow, that's huge. I wonder if he read Philosophy of Freedom and then commented on that as well, since Philosophy of Freedom was written, a couple years earlier.
He wasn't in that, though, was he?
That explains it.
Okay.
I
think that's a really good note too. We've been going for an hour and 3/4. I'll just press stop on the stream.
Sounds good.